Thank you so much, Rutus, for the introductions. Good morning, everyone. I think I would like to set the tone for the panel discussion, and I think a good place to start would be where Mitchell had started in his keynote presentation, talking about the Doing Business report and the ranking. So the Doing Business report, until it was discontinued, I think about 3 years ago, due to some irregularities with data, of course, for some countries, and I'm happy to report that Nigeria, of course, was not one of those countries that was indicted. So in the Doing Business report for 2020, Nigeria was ranked 131 out of 190 economies. Essentially, this was largely due to targeted interventions by the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, which was set up at the time to, amongst other things, improve Nigeria's international standing in that space. And then so through their collaborative efforts with ministries, departments, and agencies, also with subnational governments, also with the judiciary and the legislature, quite a number of reforms were done. So for the first time, Nigeria witnessed a focused intervention on ease of doing business. You recall that we're coming out of a recession at the time. It was very critical that area was able to support businesses. And of course, even in this time, I'm happy to see that on the government side, there's alignment. Firstly, with the retention of the PEBEC as a council focusing on ease of doing business, as well as also the appointment of the Special Advisor on Policy and Coordination. And we know the experience with businesses in relation to policy flip-flops and lack of signages, even around same government institutions within same ministries. We found how sometimes, there's no synergy. And so even looking at the budget, looking like a budget that is supposed to be driven by private sector participation, it is critical that doing business in Nigeria, there should be focused interventions on ease of doing business. Then also the SME conversation. Again, this was spoken, I think the first keynotes we had, there was talk around the SMEs, and we all know how they are the engine of every economy. They drive economies. They're the largest employers of labor. We've seen that they take up to about 80% in terms of labor. We also know their contributions to GDP, and we also know in terms of what they do in terms of businesses. They occupy about over 90% of businesses in Nigeria. So again, focus intention to ensure that SMEs, and I think Ruti spoke about one of the biggest issues, being access to finance. And it's also, just this morning I was having a conversation with an SME when she talked about the fact that she had left the bank. She had worked with one of the top tier banks for about 10 years to set up her business, and how she has grown over the years. This was an impromptu conversation, but again, it led essentially to the access to finance. And I'm, of course, very happy to hear what the first keynote speaker spoke around women and access to finance. But then, of course, in recent times, I've come to understand that it's not only just about the availability of the finance, but into what is driving their own ability to actually access it. So interventions around ensuring that those women that you're focused on are able to even understand the process, are able to access the process in terms of transparency as well. And then, and different interventions around that. So I will now go on to take the questions for the panelists, and I will be starting with you, Chidi. So looking at foreign investors in terms of opportunities in Nigeria, what do you believe are the key opportunities for foreign investors looking to do business in Nigeria, and what are some of the key considerations for investors, particularly in the economic climate?
Sure, that's okay. Check the switch.
Okay, I think this is better. So this question is always asked all the time in terms of what are the key things that the foreign investors should look at. And I think I did love Michelle's presentation because it probably did all the justice that I needed to speak on. And I think I'm going to borrow something from his presentation, which was perspective, right? So, and I think it is the perspective that you use to look at Nigeria is how you're actually going to approach it. I'm just going to share some facts. And so I was in India a month ago, and this time around, I've been to India a lot of times, but this time around I went to India with a different view on how to see how to support Indian investment back into Nigeria. And I met with a family who was looking to come into the country, and there was something that struck me, and the family, well, they mentioned something about Nigeria, that everybody sees challenges, right? But all they had been waiting for was just a perfect business environment. That when they see Nigeria, they see huge opportunities because it reminds them of the journey of India. And a lot of the growth that's happened in India actually followed similar paths. And so he mentioned one thing, and I flagged to him. Maybe I brought the challenges to him. I said, but you don't see a challenge with FX. And it just boils down to exactly what Michelle said. He said, no. And I said, why? He says, he's looked at the African horizon. He said, there's no country, on the continent that you have employment, right? Cheap employment, right? So we have the population, the average age is hovering between 16 to 19, which means he can have cheap employment for the next 2 decades. And what that does is that if he looks at the demand across just the West African corridor, if the infrastructures and policies were right, Nigeria could be an industrial hub for the rest of Africa. And what that means is that FX becomes a non-issue, because once you're able to create an industry that supports your neighbors, then it's a non-issue, because definitely you generate as much FX as you require. I think one of the other things I always tell people is also to understand the market. Nigeria has always benefited from the fact that people believe this is what doing business in Nigeria is, without actually understanding what the challenges are. So investors come with what analysts tell them, large population, growth in GDP at some point, and a lot of different factors that actually seem like business. You should put in $1 and then you should get out $2 in return. But understanding the terrain of the market also helps you to navigate the challenges. So if you're an investor coming here, so you know that definitely infrastructure might be a challenge, right? So understanding how to navigate that would also help you prepare for the challenges that you're going to face. And I think it's one of the things that we do advise investors that to try to navigate that. Now, that doesn't mean that the challenges are not there, right? But it's also good for investors to always look at the horizon and say, what is it that I can do to mitigate these challenges, before trying to invest? And we also look and say we also have to encourage what we call the inward investing. I think one of the challenges that Nigeria has had is we do talk about foreign investors all the time. But the reality is that when you look at certain factors within we need to start to encourage inward investment, because the inward investing is a lot more patient. Patient capital is what the country requires. And this is also what we advise foreign investors as well, that capital has to be patient. If you're looking for returns that are actually going to be delivered in less than 5 years, which is what most of the investors look at, it's going to be challenging because every single 5 years you face a kind of economic challenge.
Thank you very much, Judy. If I had to summarize what you've said, I would say that know your market. It's very important that they understand their market, and so in understanding the market, you know how to navigate through it. Even while you spoke, you also identified in terms of the challenges when you talked around infrastructure, and I'm sure when we hear from John, he will probably talk a little more about what government is doing about some of those challenges that you've highlighted in your statements just now. So going online to throw the same question to Yemi, who's online. I hope you can hear us. So could you share with us in terms of the same question, what do you think in terms of the key opportunities for foreign investors in Nigeria, and what do you think are the key considerations that they should be having in mind while considering investing in Nigeria? Sorry, if you can hear us, are you muted? So in terms of sound, I don't know if technical can do something about this. So maybe we will look into that. We'll have the technical team look into that for us, Yemi, and we'll come back to you as soon as that is rectified. So I will instead, then let's hear from you, John. So what sectors of the economy do you see as having the most potential for growth and investment in the near future, so that we can have, so sharing some intel with us as per government, so we're here for it, as they would like to say, as common parlance, we're here for it. So give us some intel. What are we supposed to be expecting? What do you think are the sectors of the economy that we should be looking at in terms of most potential for growth? John.
Hello. Thank you for that. I think I'll start with, thank you everyone, by the way. And thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to participate in this conversation, which I think is very important given the huge challenges that we're facing as a country and the need to have this sort of discourse as we collectively find a way to overcome all the barriers and create a prosperous Nigeria for all. Government cannot do it alone. Government would have to participate, would have to collaborate with private sector, with every one of us, in order to achieve the objectives that we are all sharing. Now, on that question, I think a lot of it, and thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for the presentation, because I think that presentation very nicely set the stage for the conversation that we're having. Quite frankly, I think a lot of the things we're going to be discussing has already been highlighted in that presentation. And going to that, I would say a lot of the things, the challenges that we face as a country, and not to be trite, also represents opportunities as well. Because a lot of value is created when you're able to solve problems for people. And the same thing holds for a country as well. We know what the usual suspects are. Energy, lack of adequate energy, food security, infrastructure, which is quite huge. I believe there's an estimate by the AFDB that we will need about $100 billion over the next 10 years to be able to just erase the infrastructure deficit that we have as a country. So, but on the other side, we have quite favorable demographics, quite favorable characteristics that I would say that in itself presents huge opportunities for investors, out of which the government is using those same areas let me frame government's response in a thematic fashion. in looking at those areas as themes that should drive intervention in the economy. So, for example, food. We have huge needs to feed our population, which is estimated to be about 400 million in 10 years or so. And with such a huge population, the food requirement goes beyond just agriculture and goes into food systems. In looking at it from a comprehensive standpoint and the ecosystem that goes beyond agriculture to agribusiness, to infrastructure, to manufacturing, and all other adjacent businesses that requires you to have a very functional food system. And that is an area that the government is quite focused on. And there are a number of specific initiatives that have been on the course to try to drive transformation in that space. One particular initiative is the Special Agriculture Processing Zones, which is an initiative, an integrated agriculture initiative that attempts to resolve the significant barriers in our agribusiness, which is the high levels of post-harvest losses that we experience, and on which some estimates put it as high as 60%. So if you're thinking about it from a farmer's standpoint, if I'm going to lose 60% of every crop that I plant and it doesn't leave the farm gate, then what is the motivation to plan? What is the motivation to make investments towards enhancing my capacity? So the way the Special Agriculture Processing Zone is set up is that it provides access to market, access to inputs, access to technology, to farmers.
Sound check.
One, with that visibility that they can sell their crop, they will be able to plan better. With access to improved inputs,
I heard myself echo.
Seedlings, they're able to increase the yield on their produce. And
it's echoing.
One aspect of it is also creating a processing as well, so that we don't end up being just making raw materials and having to import processed goods at a higher cost. By having a processing zone attached to the agricultural part of the farming part of agriculture, you not only provide access to the farmers, but you also increase our capacity to share in the global value distribution by being able to value add on our products. So agriculture remains a key intervention point. And the other areas that I'll very quickly add is infrastructure. Recently, His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu came out with the Renewed Hope Infrastructure Fund, which is supposed to resolve, is designed to resolve a number of the major infrastructure issues that we have. And infrastructure is very key. And I'll use example of what we've experienced in technology. You see, government cannot determine who the next InterSwitch is going to be, or Flutterwave, or whoever. But what government can do is to provide incentives or help in laying out the fiber optics, in making sure that the backbone infrastructure does exist, especially such infrastructure like fiber optics or railways, or that are often in the purview of the public sector. Because when you provide that sort of foundational infrastructure, it provides the platform for businesses to innovate. When you have more internet penetration, we have more access to the internet, then that's what enables a Flutterwave or a InterSwitch or Andela, all these other businesses that we've seen come up over the last 10 years to innovate and build businesses. So while we cannot point where innovation is going to go, what government can do is provide a platform to allow that to happen.
Thank you very much, John. Very good point around agriculture, because it continues to be very relevant, whether in terms of food to the population, but even also in terms of export, for us to be able to get that revenue. And then, of course, in relation to the Infrastructure Development Fund, again, very good development. And I guess we'll be looking forward to, in terms of the, actualizing that infrastructure for businesses.
I can't hear her very well.
Was already highlighted earlier around being a challenge that businesses are constantly facing. So same question to you, Mitchell. I don't know if you have anything to add in relation to sectors in the economy that you think that are witnessing in terms of what investors should be looking at in terms of economy-wise, in addition to agriculture and what he has spoken about in relation to infrastructure.
Naturally, I would like to say, when I look at technology, I'm an engineer by training, I understand that sector very well. So naturally, I would say anything to do with technology is something to look at, largely because of its ability to scale, and also because I believe that the impact that technology can bring to bear on the country, if it is properly deployed, is something that we cannot underestimate. But having said that, I will personally, if I was to make an investment in Nigeria today, I will focus on the areas I call the fundamentals of living. You know, if you go by some of the arguments I made earlier, that we have a very large population, lots of needs, but people are not quite rich. I'll be looking at anything from a position of affordability. So first, I want to impact on lives. So I'll be interested in agriculture, as we said already. I'll be interested in affordable housing. The quality of life of people must improve. I'll be interested in how private sector and government can collaborate in the area of infrastructure. So I believe there's a lot the private sector can do in the area of roads, transportation, and so on and so forth. I'm interested in healthcare, okay, more from a well-being point of view than just producing drugs. In other words, I would like to encourage people to take their health, to move more to preventive than curative, okay? And any investment that can drive these sectors are things I'll be interested in.
Okay. I guess that's what spoke what you had said during your presentation about looking for local solutions. Essentially, if we look at whatever is happening, whether it's in terms of the consumers, what the trend is, those are opportunities, and of course, again, having government support in terms of the infrastructure and possibly also financing to ensure that those business ideas actually are coming to light. I wanted to check if we can reach Yemi before we move on. Yemi, do you want to try speaking to us, and let's see? Unfortunately, not still audible. I know they're working on it.
Oh,
I can see
dear.
the technical team working on that. So if you just bear with us,
Oh, dear.
we'll check with you again to see if...
Okay. Okay.
Okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, could you try speaking well into your mic and see if you'll be audible?
Yeah, I'm speaking loud.
So I don't think it's resolved at the moment. So we'll probably come back
Okay.
to you again. Okay, so George, so businesses, we're talking about businesses and how they are in terms of operations, operating in Nigeria. I wanted to pick your brains on what you think are sort of like the unique challenges that businesses have had to face, whether on the cultural side or the business side. Maybe you can share some of that experience with us, especially as we have government in the room. I think that would be good feedback.
Thank you very much. Yes, and look, they're the usual ones, right? When you ask this question, you hear security, you hear FX, you hear, what's the other one? You hear infrastructure, right? But for us as GE Healthcare, the biggest challenges we face, I would say, are around the absence of market data, right? The absence of specialized intermediaries and partners, and I would say the difficulties in accessing financing. And I'll just go into each of them a little bit.
So when you talk about market data, we manufacture medical equipment, right? We manufacture and distribute medical equipment. In my day job, I have to create go-to-market strategies to maximize the sales of medical equipment, in Nigeria. When I did the same role in Boston, I could sit in front of my desk, and by the click of a button, I will determine and find out, the list. I get a list of hospitals in the area, the location of those hospitals. I knew the number of each type of medical equipment in that hospital. That's demographic data. I could determine clinical data. I knew the number of cases, number of procedures, each type of procedures, in each hospital, right? I could determine or identify financial data, so revenue per department, the reimbursements from insurance to each hospital, each department. So as you can imagine, you sit down in front of your desk and you can scan an entire market, and you know where the market gaps are, the market opportunities, are. In Nigeria, that is not the case, right? So when you operate in this kind of environment, you need to pay attention to primary research, right? You need to know your market intimately. I really like what Mr. Elegbe said, you need to recognize that Nigeria is not just one big market, but a collection of micro markets, right? The cities constitute individual markets in themselves. You need to pay attention to strengthen the capabilities of partners, across your value chain. So we're always, engaging with our logistic providers, helping them to improve in the areas of quality, compliance, health, safety, and environment, things like that. And then the last one is, difficulties in accessing capital. I haven't said, lack of capital, because I agree with what Mr. Elegbe said as well, and what Chidi said. There is enough capital in Nigeria. What we lack is viable projects, right? Bankable projects. And I think here, the two issues. One, the fact that, there's a high cost of capital. The fact that there is a lot of risks that is priced into debt and equity. And on the other hand, like Chidi's mentioned, our patients need patient capital, right? So when you think about that, it's important then, as new companies or as market entrants, establish your proper corporate governance structures, right? That way you try to de-risk your risk as much as possible. And look, I think it's also important to note that, look, as a country, I would say that the discipline of project development is taken for granted in Nigeria. We don't pay attention to recruit, advisory firms to properly understudy our market. Understudy your market, make sure you understand the needs of the market, the competition, what's available, what are the gaps in the market, what are the buying preferences, what are the risks, how you mitigate those risks, challenge your assumptions, make sure that you fully understand what you're getting into. And look, there are advisory firms at every level. There are the PwCs and BCGs of this world, and then there are advisory firms for SMEs as well. So these are some of the challenges we face at GE.
I'm sure PwC and BCG will appreciate your mention at this sort of like event there. They got a free advert. I think those are very valid points. I like the point that you made around data. In fact, when you spoke about data, I think this cuts across quite a number in terms of different sectors. I thought of mining, for instance. We have data issues there. You know that there's a drive to diversify the economy, even though I know that there's some efforts in that regard. But yes, indeed, you can't argue with data, and it should drive decisions. Because if data drives decisions, then we would see how, in terms of how that would affect in terms of business operations and ultimately the economy as well. And I also like the point around capacity building. understanding that partners, and I think again this also cuts across different economies, because we're witnessing that even in the energy sector, where we're having the indigenous companies that we're trying to ensure that they have capacity over time through the government's efforts and the recent executive order as well, which is revisiting that to see whether that support is actually there for the internationals. Very good points, and I wanted to ask if Ibrahim had additional points to make specifically on this question.
Sorry?
Yes. So in terms of challenges,
yes.
If there's any additional ones you would like to mention?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes,
I guess my mic is working good. So,
sorry, if I can just cut in to just give John a heads up that I'll be coming to him. As we're talking about challenges, we'll be talking about solutions. So we'll be hearing from you next.
Let me look at it from the challenges of environmental and social issues. Yeah, so doing business in Nigeria today, a lot of businesses consider this as a major challenge. And the trick is understanding that these challenges also come with opportunities, like Michel rightly mentioned in his keynote. Getting to understand this starts with the mindset of the business owner. That mindset of understanding that, yes, the business is primarily set up to make money, but the way that you treat your staff or your employees is connected to how you make money, or that how the considerations that you have for your host communities is connected to how you make money. That systems thinking, that's the starting point. So navigating environmental and social issues for sustainable growth starts with having that right mindset. The mindset that, yes, there are risks, impacts, and opportunities. The impacts can be positive, and there are also opportunities that come with this. So in terms of the risks and opportunities, there are a number of them. And the second thing for the business owner to consider, leveraging E&S issues for sustainable growth, is to understand these different types of risks and opportunities. Risks in terms of climate change, risks in terms of employee rights abuses, host communities' rights abuses, supply chain risks, and so on and so forth, and opportunities such as building resilience, such as attracting investors and talents, such as building good reputation, opportunities for innovation and building trust, and then strengthening relationships and going into new businesses. For example, Sterling Bank today is pivoting or building leadership around solar technologies. Their head office is completely powered by solar, and they are building a niche around funding solar businesses in Nigeria. So the second thing for business owners to know is that we have these risks and opportunities, but what is now material to the business? Not all risks and opportunities will be material to every business. What is the E&S risks that are material to InterSwitch will be very different from those
that are material to, say, a Julius Berger. In conclusion, what you then want to do is to conduct your business in a way that you minimize these risks and then maximize the positive impacts and the opportunities that some of which I just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I like the point, really, again, speaking to knowing your markets. It's largely around that, because if you then understand that, you understand the risks, and you also understand the opportunities that's available in spite of the risks. But also, some of the points that have been made concerning the fact that all this is still underpinned by government's efforts in ensuring that there's a conducive environment, both on the soft business side in terms of ease of doing business, and also on the hard infrastructure in terms of infrastructure, roads and transportation and every other thing around that. John, just before I try again to see if we will be able to take Yemi, who has been patiently waiting, but also following in terms of conversations, because I see her from time to time nodding and agreeing with some of the points that have been made this morning. John, do you want to speak to some of the challenges that have been talked around, whether in relation to data? You've already talked about infrastructure. There's still also, essentially just speaking around some of those issues that they have also mentioned this morning.
All right, thank you. And as a former management consultant, I agree with George that you need the EYs and the PwCs to help in, because project development is a big issue in Nigeria. As a frontier market, a lot of things are just being done for the first time, or there are not a lot of models that businesses can follow, since a lot of our sectors are still immature. So data is a huge area. What government in this regard is providing the right incentives for people, to make it worthwhile for people to get into the data business, and understanding we're in a period of the fourth industrial revolution where AI is disrupting established business models, right? With that, for government investors to create the right environment that allows businesses to be able to exploit the opportunities that exist within the data space, and also enhance the capacity of the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics as well. That can also be a source of information for businesses as well, to be able to get the right data, particularly as it relates to government-related or public sector-related information. But unique data that speaks to specific segments of the sector, that's largely a private sector play, and the right people, the role for government there is put the right incentives in place to encourage investments in that regard. And one thing that I wanted to state outright is that the foundation of solving any problem is really doing business, right? The ease of doing business, to your point. And it's a positive thing in that regard is that the Excellency's administration has continued from the last administration with PEBEC. Oftentimes we say in Nigeria that there's no continuity of policy. There's always policy somersaults. The environment is often very inchoate. People are not sure of what's going to be in place. The regulatory and policy environment is too disruptive. But in continuing with PEBEC, and in fact continuing with the same person who led it in the last administration, it shows the right focus is on ease of doing business. And I think this would create the conducive environment to be able to mobilize investment to come into Nigeria. It's a lot of work to be done, but at least in that regard, we are able to create, when I say we, I mean everyone involved is able to create an environment that is attractive to capital. We are interestingly, we are in a period, I think Mitchell mentioned it, we're in a period where there's a liquidity glut globally, right? And there's this saying that capital will go to places where it is taken care of, like capital is a cow, and we only go to places where it's taken care of. And when you have the right institutional and business environment, you're more likely to attract more capital than your competitors. So this is necessary. Now, to that point, what are the mega trends that are driving countries, that are driving the share of countries' distribution of the financial and liquidity gains that comes from globalization and the lots of capital that is around? It's technology, migration, and to an extent it's also government liquidity, because government liquidity translates to government's ability to be able to deliver on public service, on migration, to the extent that you're getting positive migration, where skills are coming to your country or skills are not leaving your country, to the extent that you're able to harness your human capital as an asset. And in Nigeria, this is something that the government is clearly focused on. We know we have a huge population, but a huge population is a double-edged sword. It could represent an existential threat. I mean, 400 million people in 10 years, and you're growing at 2%, that is not sustainable. That's a recipe for disaster, right? Because you have to have employment, employ those people, you have to educate them, clothe them, feed them, and if you don't have the capacity to do that, it's a recipe for disaster. So large population doesn't necessarily translate to poverty. So in recognition of that, there's a need to upskill, educate, reskill our populace, and in that regard, the government, one of the initiatives that the government is using to address that issue is not only from a traditional education standpoint, but from an alternative standpoint. So for example, there's a program called Investment in Digital and Creative Economy. And that initiative is backed by AFDB and several other BFI, just to look at how to, with such a youthful population, how are we able to exploit the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution, particularly in digital and creative economy, an area where we've seen so much transformative gains, and oftentimes without any government intervention. I mean, what has happened with the interswitches in the fintech space, one can say happened organically without government intervention, and what we're also seeing in the creative space. So this initiative is attempting to make sure that there are opportunities, and people should please look it up. IDAS, ICT, one of the initiatives pushing in this area. So looking at human capital is one area, one solution for making sure that what represents a positive for us doesn't turn to something negative, which is our huge
population, particularly.
Exploit the opportunities that are present in the knowledge economy. And I'll close with this.
If I can just, I think that's a lot for us to take in just now. I think that's a good place for us to stop with you, because we'll still come back to you. I like the points that you made, especially concerning continuity. I think that's reassurance for the people here in the room to understand that government is aware of that and appreciative, and the investments that we're seeing in the young population, in the digital space, as well, empowering them. Essentially, by empowering them, they're also able, in the short to long or mid-term, to also be employers of labor as well. So we see in terms of the ripple effect of some of those initiatives. So thank you for sharing that. I understand that Yemi can hear us now, so I really want to go to her. Please, could you just speak into the mic? So I'm sure that...
Hello once again.
Yes, very good to hear you.
Okay.
Yes, Yemi. Okay, so very quickly, Yemi, if we just take comments from you, just to talk around what you feel are key considerations that foreign investors should be looking at, foreign investors wishing to do business in Nigeria or already doing business in Nigeria. What are the key considerations that they should also be putting in mind, just contributing to some of the points that have already been made by the panelists, especially, as we find ourselves in Nigeria currently, the current economic climate. So we can just quickly take additional comments from you.
Okay, I hope I won't be repeating some of the others, but I think that it is important that they understand the global economic volatility that is going on. They have to monitor disruptions in sourcing of raw materials or equipment. George was talking about bringing in equipment, but especially as it relies with imports, right? They have to also see how they can build in contingency plans or explore local, resource alternatives. Our current economic climate is forcing more people to look at alternative local sources for goods and services, and even certain products. Having, if you are making something like soap, you have to look for other local raw materials that will give you those type of that will make a good quality as well. There are also certain sector-specific risks within the different industries. They rely on commodities, prices, and this might be one of the things that would bring in greater uncertainty for companies. The other thing, of course, I'm sure somebody must have spoken about our inflation. Michelle mentioned it, but also the current fluctuations. The impact on what it is causing and what it will cause materially to their business is also something that needs to be considered. Talked about volume in terms of leveraging on our population, the interest rate environment. The investors have to look at debt versus equity financing a lot. With higher rates, they need to be able to evaluate the balance between borrowing capital and seeking direct equity investments. So these are some of the things that investors need to consider. And of course, also alternative financing.
Okay, thank you very much, Emi. I think those were very, very relevant, very, very relevant to the conversations. Chidi, I'm going to go quickly to you, talking around, and I think we've talked about some of them, but so maybe you can also still share insights. Talking about political risks, talking about, economic risks in doing business in Nigeria. What do you think are some of the political risks that businesses should be aware of? And in your own experience as well, can you speak around some of the, how have you been able to mitigate that? What do you think are, interventions or certain steps that can be taken to mitigate such risks that you have so identified in the business environment?
Okay, I think there are some that have mitigants. There's some that you most likely just have to deal with the challenges. I don't like to speak too much of political risk, but they're very evident. And I think you did mention some of the challenges which a lot of the investors face. I think one is actually consistency of policies. I think that's one of the biggest issues. And sometimes it is just moving from the ideology of different governments in terms of how they deal with factors. But it is a risk that's evident. Just the change in, your tax computations, or a lot of these issues are things that investors need to be aware of. Security is another one. We've had investors who, time and time, they don't understand the terrain of the environments which they're going to operate in. and then they plan a business, and then they come in and realize the security challenges around the areas and not pre-planning on how to navigate this, gets them into a lot of issues. Just moving raw materials from one place to the other becomes a challenge. Whereas they might have sited this industry in a more centralized location or a more efficient location to be able to deal with these challenges. So I'll step away from a lot of the political risks because like I said, most of them, the mitigants are actually very difficult to be able to identify because this all goes back to how the different polities, deal with these challenges, which the investors really can't control. The economic risks are actually the more evident ones, And I always keep referring back to Michelle's presentation and saying, understanding history is important. Nigeria has a 5-year cycle. Let's use FX. If everybody has noticed, every 5 years something happens. And it also starts with what you call a global economic shock. So when we talk about the FX devaluation and it's not unusual to Nigeria. I've actually looked at some of the commentaries in the space on how people are trying to debate that, FX was this before, FX is now that, but nobody's studying the currencies across the continent. You'll see that they're experiencing the same shocks. And everything started from the crisis, when we had the COVID and co. But they experienced their shocks a lot earlier. And I think what the challenge was, our economic or our political policies did not allow the shocks to actually seep in. And what we're doing is a delayed reaction. Now, I usually tell investors to understand that these cycles are there, right? So if you plan for these cycles, it's easier for you to navigate the risk. So when you look at something like those macro shocks, so when you know that this would happen, then you can either plan your supply chain better, you can start to look at how do you source raw materials locally, how do you backward integrate certain factors, how do you create what you call unlocking the logistics challenges like you mentioned. So this risk are actually evident in the data. And I know these data are not evident, but people can actually look at that and take that. And then lastly, it's just the cost of actually doing business is actually exorbitant, right? So there's a risk that a lot of investors need to be aware of. So what happens is that when it's not planned properly, then it becomes as a surprise, and that's why you see business come in and exit, not because they haven't actually factored in the fact that these things are there. It's just a matter of when is it going to happen.
Okay, thank you. I like the point you made in terms of course, we're all very conscious of how there's the policy flip-flop. Again, I keep mentioning the fact that we have government in the room, in the presence of John. So I think it's very important that we continue to restate this because that's why he's here, to be able to get that feedback from private sector that's in the room and to be able to take it back while they're working on, whatever policies. But again, to restate it also that we also recognize government's efforts in this regard. And again, this was to my point earlier when I had mentioned about the appointment of the special advisor on policy and coordination. I like to think, as private sector myself, that this is also a focused attempt to ensure that those policies have some level of synergy, and we're able to see that. And so having somebody whose focus is looking at that and ensuring that that is the case. And I hear you also around the points about knowing your markets and then understanding that these things would happen, understanding that, and I guess that is also goes to George's point earlier when he talked about capacity building and having advisory. But I'm also very concerned about the businesses, their ability to afford that level of advisory, which is absolutely needed. I do understand that in order for you to fully appreciate the market and to anticipate these events that you have mentioned, you must have the right level of advisory. But then maybe again, John, back to you as to whether or not government would also focus on capacity building in that regard. whether in terms of supporting MDAs across, in terms of transparency and making information available real time. Maybe that would also help in ensuring that businesses are able to plan. So talking about businesses, going to small businesses, which we've mentioned, are so very important to the economy. And if we want to grow this Nigerian economy, we must also talk about SMEs. So I'm going to you, Michelle, in terms of SMEs, even though we do realize that you, by any form of description, your company cannot be described as nowhere near as an SME. But then talking as somebody who you mentioned during your keynote, you started your business a few years in, and so I'm sure that even given that, and also even dealing with vendors and so many other things, the SMEs are actually also still in your space. So my question to you is really around, what do you think in terms of the SMEs? How do you think that government can support them? What more can be done to empower them? What support systems can be put in place? Are you aware of any? And what other additional support systems can be put in place to ensure that they are able to set up, they are able to scale up, they are able to survive?
Okay, thank you. Yes, you cannot describe International as SME, but we do have thousands of customers in that category. So we try to look at them from time to time to understand their challenges and what kind of things we can do. First, let me say that I will have to adjust your question a bit. So it's like somebody who is writing JAMB and is setting a question. I want to shift it away from what government can do. Okay? I mean, when I deal with government, I just talk about policies. Okay? Create good policies, create enough room for the creative juices of people to be expressed in a way that a lot of uncertainties can be removed. So if I was to challenge government to support SMEs, my challenge would be, how do you create an environment where the degrees of uncertainties that ravage businesses can be reduced significantly? Uncertainties around FX, for example, would be one of them. The legal framework. I mean, when I enter a contract with someone and something goes wrong, I want to be able to go to the courts and get redress, irrespective of not knowing anybody, so on and so forth. So those basic things that people take for granted in other crimes to allow business to thrive are the things I think government should focus on. But if I was to talk to SMEs directly, I want to tell them that the way I see government is, government policies are necessary, but they are not sufficient for success from an SME point of view. And I'll give you examples. Every time somebody is losing out, somebody else is gaining. Okay? The question is, are there enough legal framework in place for you to do your business correctly? So from that point of view, therefore, my challenge to SMEs will be hope that government will do the right things, but the lack of those things does not take away the opportunities. So the challenges will always be there, but focus more on the opportunities. Like we say to people when we mentor them, you have your strengths, you have your weaknesses. Focus on your strengths. Recognize your weaknesses, but focus on your strengths. So what I'll be saying to SM is, understand that there are challenges, but focus on the opportunities that exist. Within those opportunities, everything you need to deal with the threats to your business should most likely be fine. And that's why you find that in every sector of the economy, there's always somebody that is doing very well whenever that person is complaining. So take time to find out the key success drivers for your business, recognize the challenges of the economy and every other thing, but not lose sight of the opportunities that exist. Okay?
I like the point that you've made, especially the idea is to have a pragmatic approach, that it is what it is in terms of the business environment, in terms of what you would have to face, but that indeed there's still numerous opportunities available in the country, and to that extent, there's a lot to tap into if you are able to then dig deep, do deep dives into those areas to anticipate, to pivot, expect disruptions, but that you can actually survive and that you can actually thrive. Thank you. Yemi, I'm coming to you in relation to entrepreneurship, right? So in your opinion, what do you think are the key factors contributing to Nigeria's position as a hub for entrepreneurship and innovation in Africa? And how can aspiring entrepreneurs leverage these factors for success?
You know, I'll take it from the point that Michelle made. He talked about growth drivers, and he talked about demography, population, and pent-up demand. But I'll drill down a bit more into, let's look at the demography. We're talking about Europe and other parts of other continents having an aging population. And therefore, we are at an advantage in terms of our demography, with about 70% of us, of the population being below, population under 30 years old. Now, if we look at it at a level down, what are these characteristics of the young population? When we're talking about entrepreneurship and innovation, we need to look at the period in which this population are born. We call them the children of the cloud, right, in terms of technology. And they tend to be more open to new ideas. They are risk-taken, and they are less constrained by traditional business models. And because of this, their level of innovation and entrepreneurship is increased. The other thing, if we look at them, is that a huge pool of them have a potential innovators and entrepreneurs. My team is made up of, because we run a software company and developers, and they are very young. And one of the things that I have noticed is that they're not constrained or confined in anything. The way we think about the business model and putting things around it is not the way they think about it. They come with ideas from a different perspective. Many of them possess untapped skills and are understanding the issue about Michelle's reference to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The issue about them understanding problems and the local problems and the ability to look for solutions for them to solve these problems is one of the things that make that contributes to the factor of the potential of entrepreneurs and innovators in Nigeria. And if we look at them, if we look at the tech-savvy environment that we have, we've talked about today about the mobile first penetration. We've talked about adoption of, we've looked at adoption of emerging technology. The fact still remains that they are not afraid to look at AI. They're not afraid to start building, even if it's from raw skills. Right? Self-learning. A lot of them have done self-learning when we're talking about these entrepreneurs and their innovative capabilities. They've done it in self-learning. They look at blockchain and they're able to provide and innovate around that. And then, the initiatives, when we are looking at the growing ecosystem around entrepreneurship and innovation. We have several incubators and hubs, growing accelerators coming up and trying to, structure and guide all of this demography or entrepreneurs, as you might call them. And then there is a growing network of angel investors, of VCs and funds that are coming into the country. And all of these is aiding the entrepreneurs and innovators around being, making Nigeria a major hub. When we're talking about investors, they are coming through and beginning to see these growth drivers as an advantage. When Michelle was talking about how Nigeria is going and is now being placed, I ran into Goldman Sachs predictions that by the year 2075, Nigeria will be one of the 3 countries, economies in the world, right? Three out in the continent. And we were number 5, going in the hierarchy of how it was placed. And what does that tell us? It tells us that innovation, our entrepreneurship, seeing us as a hub, our population, our growth drivers are what is going to drive us in the next 50 years to be one of the top economies on the continent. And these are just some of but let's not also forget, he spoke about resilience. And really, that is a very serious thing. You see entrepreneurs innovate and re-innovate and re-innovate and try and do things differently, trying to solve the problem, in spite of the environment and the economy in which we are in our current climate. And they are doing this successfully. But what makes them more successful is their resilience and tenacity. And we are known for this, really. But why it is happening, why we are so resilient, I don't know. But we see it over and resourcefulness from this demography of people, the informal sector inspirations, the success of existing players in the informal sector. We're talking about SMEs. And if you note that they are the ones that are driving the economy of Nigeria. So these are some of the factors, the powerful drivers and challenge that we can see.
Okay, thank you very much, Yemi. I think again, this also speaks to a lot of what I hear you in terms of resilience, in terms of our entrepreneurs, and essentially the ability to innovate. But I also think it speaks to some of the points that the panelists have also made concerning entrepreneurship and the role it plays for the economy. So I'm going to wrap up with you, Ibrahim, to just talk about compliance obligations. So it's quite complex in terms of compliance obligations in Nigeria. So I just wondered if you had some thoughts around how to navigate. So as a business, how does one navigate compliance obligations, even as you are trying to push for, in terms of the business, in terms of innovation, in terms of driving your business? So any quick thoughts on this before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you. That's really a very key issue, one challenge that a lot of businesses do face. And I'll give you an example. In my space, there's something we call environmental impact assessment. We actually have, it's primarily a regulatory issue, but beyond regulations, of course, for big infrastructure projects, it's a key input into determining the bankability of the project. But let's look at it from the regulatory perspective. In Nigeria, we do have 4 EIA regulations. There is the EIA Act number 86 of 1992 by that the Federal Ministry of Environment is driving. Then we have the oil and gas version of the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulation. Then we have the Town Planning Act that also requires environmental impact assessment. And finally, in the mining sector, we do have an environmental impact assessment regulation. So that's the kind of challenges that businesses do face in speaking to multiple regulations. And, complying with that can be a very, very big challenge. I think that in facing this challenge, the primary thing, the first thing is awareness. It's good for businesses to understand these risks, that there might be other regulations that apply to what they're doing than they are aware of. So there should be that deliberate intention to search, because the other thing about compliance is enforcement. What we are seeing is that the capacity of government to enforce these regulations is increasing. So you may, as they say in law, ignorance is not an excuse. So you may just one day find out that some regulators are in front of your office and talking about something that you're completely unaware of. So being deliberate about looking for what's applicable, it's important. And in my practice, there is something that we recommend, which is a regulation register. That register will, just have all of the applicable laws and what you are required to comply. It's good for, sometimes that sits with the company secretary. So it's good for you to keep an eye on it, just so you can prepare and be a bit proactive in compliance as much as you can. The second point in dealing with compliance issues is building relationships. And that's one of the things that they are not going to teach you in the MBA class, but it's very important with respect to doing business in Nigeria. You should build relationships. This came to fore a lot during COVID, when we had to face challenges that we never thought of, and we had to rely on the relationships that we had to survive that time. So building good relationships with regulators, with stakeholders will be very important.
Thank you very much. I agree with you completely. This is very key, and especially when we deal with compliance. So essentially, in wrapping up, I think we have really talked about opportunities. The panelists have talked extensively about the potential in Nigeria in terms of the economy, how there are opportunities for doing business. They've also highlighted in terms of some of the issues and challenges that are also in that space. And of course, we have government here who has also shared with us some of the interventions that we should look forward to. One thing that is also very clear, one thing that has stayed with me particularly is looking for local solutions for our issues. And I think in doing that, I think it's very important that government has more engagement with private sector, because it's important that these solutions are co-created. Even as government is doing all of those initiatives, it's very important that government also keeps an ear on realities and the conversations around what is essentially happening and what are the solutions that private sector is even building into that process. So co-creating those solutions possibly would have a far-reaching effect in terms of how those businesses are able to operate and how government is also solving for those problems. So on that note, this marks the end of this particular panel session. I thank the panelists most sincerely for their contributions, which I believe that has been enlightening and insightful for the people in the room. And yes, thank you, and happy good morning.